Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are covering Justice League: The Sixth Dimension, and I know I'm behind on this. I know like a bunch of other comic book YouTubers have covered it. Don't care. I am excited about this story. I am hyped about this story. Okay, Justice League: The Sixth Dimension is probably one of the coolest stories to come out of DC Comics for like a long time, right? So initially, like when it comes to Scott Snyder, like really writing Justice League in general, remember all this is like one part, it's like a part of a big cohesive story, right? Like the end result is Perpetua and like her return and manipulation of like really like the omniverse, not even the multiverse, but like the omniverse. And then like there's gonna be a couple other characters that kind of get thrown in here, but it's all sort of like leading up to that moment, right? Like it's ever since we had like the first fracture of the Source Wall that landed on Earth in the first volume of the Justice League, running all the way up until now and going into like Year of the Villain and all that kind of stuff. This all focuses heavily on the character of Perpetua, the villain of Perpetua, who just hasn't shown up yet for the most part. Well, I think in Year of the Villain she may have, but basically like she's trying to make her return. Now, initially this leads into I guess it picks up with the Justice League kind of coming together. Now, a couple things to bear in mind here. Remember, Mera is currently the Queen of Atlantis, right? Like Aquaman's off doing his own thing. And it was a way for DC to kind of focus on Aquaman's character absent the Justice League itself. So really like his ongoing series is kind of isolated now. It's kind of like cut off from like everything else going on in DC. It's cool and it's really good, but it doesn't really pertain to like the overall Justice League as a whole. I mean, there's a couple things going on here and there, but for the most part, it's kind of removed. But the whole reason why the Justice League is here is because what they've done is they've gone forward with the purpose of like bringing back a classic character that we haven't seen for a long time. Of course, this classic character is revealed when the guy makes his return, when he was supposed to show up at this point in time, and it turns out to be Mr. Mxyzptlk. Now, the question a lot of people are probably wondering is where has Mr. Mxyzptlk been? Like, what's he been doing this entire time? Well, I can tell you exactly what he's been doing. He's been using Skillshare, #sponsored video. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in design, business, and more. And premium memberships give you unlimited access so you can actually join the classes and communities that are just right for you. Now, if you guys are looking to like topple me and become like the next Comics Explained, which is entirely possible, they got classes on graphic design, photography, creative writing, film and video, marketing, productivity, all that kind of good stuff. All the things that can basically like get you on the road to becoming the new Comics Explained. And to get you started, Skillshare is giving away a free 2-month unlimited access trial to the first 500 people who click the link in the description. And after that, it's only around $10 a month. Having said that, we actually don't know what Mr. Mxyzptlk's been doing this entire time. We really don't. And that's kind of an interesting thing, right? Because like you go from like Superman Reborn, where like Mxyzptlk has been pretending to be Clark Kent this entire time, and then basically like you end up with like the New 52 and the pre-New 52 Superman merging into one another, to Mxyzptlk vanishing, and then we have no idea where he went to. But the funny thing about this is actually kind of a cool display of power, is this is kind of a story that I would say would be an introductory place for people who are new to his character, right? Because I mean, he doesn't appear all the time. I mean, it used to be that he would appear not all the time, but like more frequently than he does now. But I think since the beginning of DC Rebirth, he's probably shown up like maybe twice, if you consider Superman Reborn, like him showing up twice in that story. So I guess being there for like the whole story. So in reality, anybody who's going through and like reading DC Comics right now has probably never heard of him. And so what Scott Snyder does is give us this kind of grand display of the power that Mxyzptlk has. And literally like he just turns the world of the Justice League upside down. Like John Stewart, the Green Lantern, goes to launch an attack and Mxyzptlk just like starts breaking his body down. It's cool things like that, because you don't really see this. And that's one of the big differences between like Marvel and DC Comics, right? Like Marvel Comics, you have a lot of reality warpers, right? You have the Beyonder, you have the Beyonders, you've got the Molecule Man, Owen Reese, you've got the Cosmic Entities, you've got Galactus, you've got classic Silver Surfer from the 1980s, you've got all kinds of like crazy power, you know, people with crazy powers. In DC, it's a lot more grounded in terms of like extreme capabilities and extreme powers, and you don't really see those. And so seeing this in here is actually kind of cool. But of course, then that goes into John Jones forcing Mxyzptlk to start like saying his name in his own mind without saying it out loud. Now, for people who are new to this, whenever Mxyzptlk says his name out loud, he's sent back to the fifth dimension, right? It's the one way to kind of get rid of him. And that's the sort of ongoing joke that goes on with this character, right? Whenever he shows up, he bothers Superman for a while. Superman has to use his intellect and trick Mxyzptlk into saying his name backwards. I'm sorry, saying his name backwards the right way, and in order to send him back to his own dimension. Now, of course, the reason why Mxyzptlk doesn't pull that stunt with Batman is because Batman he'd play some mind games, and then like Mxyzptlk would end up saying his own name and then going back to his dimension before he even realized what happened. But it's kind of a cool thing, because what Mxyzptlk says is like the impact of the Justice League destroying the Source Wall and the kind of cascading effect that it takes throughout the entire multiverse isn't just felt in like their native dimension, it's felt in like the fifth dimension, right? Like it spreads throughout everything. And that's when things get a little bit hairy, because what ends up happening here is we sort of get this explanation that things are not as limited as we thought they were, that things are not as basic as we thought they were. That what Mxyzptlk does is he kind of comes forward and says, okay, there's like a whole host of multiverses out there. And for the most part in DC Comics, we only ever really assumed there was just one, right? Like there was a positive multiverse and the negative multiverse. And that was basically it. But like the negative multiverse was more of like a reflection, right? It was a darker and more evil and twisted and hopeless reflection of the positive multiverse. Mxyzptlk says, no, it's not like that. Like you have a singular multiverse, and then like the third dimension is the one that we occupy, and then you have like time, which is the fourth dimension, and then you have the fifth dimension, which is just pure imagination. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, to a world of pure imagination, like that kind of a thing. And then the sixth dimension is the one that nobody really knows anything about, because only individuals of the highest order are allowed to go there. Not only that, we actually kind of get this explanation that what Perpetua did is she had like what were essentially like three sons, right? It was the Monitor, the Anti-Monitor, and then the World Forger. And the kind of cool thing about this is the World Forger, as he's depicted here, we've seen him in the Dark Multiverse, or at least the Dark Multiverse version of him. And so again, like it's kind of cool to see Scott Snyder make these callbacks to like stories that he's written in the past, which again is actually pretty sweet. But the idea behind this is that there are like multiple multiverses out there, right? Like throughout the entire Omniverse, there's a whole host of multiverses, and like all those multiverses have their own individual universes. And that Perpetua was kind of the creator of this multiverse, and presumably the creator of what seemed to kind of be all others. Now, how we reconcile that with like the presence, right? Like DC's absolute God, it's kind of difficult to do, because when it comes to the presence in DC Comics, that's largely a Vertigo concept, right? Lucifer Morningstar and Michael the Archangel and all that kind of stuff, that's all really Vertigo. And you never really see it cross over with like the main DC universe line of stories. And so because that's the case, we can kind of assume they're two distinctly different things, neither one having a bearing on the other. And so with that being the case, we can sort of take that little bit of information and just kind of run with it. But the overall gist here is that in order for them to truly understand what's going on, they have to enter the sixth dimension and see how far this goes, and see if they can't like find a way to, at the very least, solve things. Now, there are a couple of things that kind of get mentioned in here. For example, like the Justice League has hidden from humanity hidden from everybody on Earth the fact that they broke the Source Wall. They're like the multiverse is spiraling towards its inevitable doom. And the reason why is because if the Justice League came out and said, okay, everybody, FYI, we kind of broke the Source Wall. And so because of that, the entire multiverse is hurling to its imminent doom, which will probably happen in like a few weeks or so. Society's going to completely and totally collapse, right? It's going to totally fall apart. And so, of course, what Mxyzptlk says, and this is kind of a throwaway moment from Scott Snyder, but we can kind of accept it. What Mxyzptlk says is that like with Batman and Superman, they're essentially like Batmite, kind of the Batman equivalent of like Mxyzptlk is, he and Mxyzptlk himself are the two most powerful imps from like the fifth dimension. And so in the various escapades, the various instances when Mxyzptlk had shown up and kind of bothered Superman, what he'd been doing was essentially just like kind of bombarding him with energy that would allow him to access the sixth dimension. Now again, this is really kind of Scott Snyder just grabbing that and throwing it in for the purpose of just being like, we need a reason for Superman to be able to go in, and he's the only one that can go in. So like Mxyzptlk made it happen. It's a very hand-wavy kind of throwaway thing, but it works for the nature of the story, right? I mean, you can kind of yes, and then just kind of go with it and just sort of call it a day. But what ends up happening is Superman passes through the door and then immediately comes back, and like he's older. And I have to say, let's be honest with ourselves here. All right, I know like Jorge Jimenez, who I think is Jimenez, is how you pronounce his last name, the guy doing the art for this comic. Superman looks amazing, dude. Like old man Superman looks awesome. And like, dude, here's the crazy thing: he's basically almost godlike in power. But then like we get this kind of rug pulled out from under us, right? Because it's like, hey, welcome to the Hall of Justice, which is in like the future of what your universe is going to be, and it's crazy and it looks amazing and all that kind of cool stuff. And then we get the rug pulled out from under us when we actually end up running into like actual Superman, who's just kind of on this singular planet of sorts in this almost infinite expanse of nothingness, surrounded by like all these dead versions of himself. And so it's just kind of like, okay, so like what in the world is going on right now? What in the world is happening right now? And it's kind of a cool thing, because what ends up happening is that with the rest of the Justice League being unaware of the fact that Superman's missing, because as far as they're aware, this is him. He's just kind of been here for decades, and basically they won the war against Perpetua, and everything the Justice League hoped would happen ended up taking place. He basically says like, before we answer any questions, before we get too much into things, just go explore the world. Like go explore this world and just see where it leads you. And like in this world that they occupy, it's basically perfect, right? It's like a perfect world. It's pretty cool the way it works. For example, John Stewart has become the White Lantern, and like this future version of Barry and John have basically figured out a way to like run in and out and to kind of move freely throughout the time stream without creating any kind of fractures, without breaking anything. And so the way this works is it's almost kind of like the end of Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, right? Where like John Stewart basically uses the life entity to like create life on worlds, and then Barry figures out where to put them in the time stream. It's actually really cool. Like it's really awesome. Like they're creating entire multiverses. Everything is kind of orchestrated and built out of like this place that they occupy, this space that they're in. They essentially just kind of like seed the multiverse, seed new worlds, the whole 9 yards. They're essentially gods. And it's kind of cool the way this plays out, because then you switch over to Gotham City, and Gotham City is a utopia. And it's kind of a funny thing because that's sort of what Bruce Wayne was always fighting for, right? Like to lead Gotham City to a place, even if he didn't necessarily live long enough to see it get there, but to lead it to a place where Gotham was kind of like, not really like a metropolis, but like something better, where it was a place that people wanted to be. It was a place of spiritual and emotional, growth and relaxation, a place where people could be at peace. To see Gotham has finally achieved that, and to see that it's kind of maintained the legacy of Batman by constructing a massive statue to his legacy is kind of an honorable thing. Not only that, we actually end up finding out that like Dick Grayson has taken over the mantle of Batman. That Dick Grayson is like the guy who's basically, kind of maintaining, or at least not even maintaining order, the guy who's kind of overseeing all these things. But again, like this is a perfect world. This is a perfect life. This is what the Justice League has always been shooting for. And so again, kind of jumping back to Superman, who's in this bleak and dark environment, we end up having like this, what was supposedly his future version, this future version of himself who shows up and says, hey, look, man, this can go one of two ways. Either you can like stop fighting and you can basically join my cause. You can see things the way that I see them and become a part of what it is that we're trying to achieve here, or you can be left behind and be one of these countless bodies that's sort of just dotting this landscape here and die in this place. And it's kind of a crazy thing, because what he ends up saying is like that light up there, that sun that you basically see will not be there forever. And it's enough to keep you sustained, but it's not going to be enough for you to really like use your powers. Your powers will eventually drain, right? The solar energy you have built up in your cells will eventually drain out, and like you're going to die in this place. So answer me now, like, are you going to join me or are you not going to join me? And ultimately, by virtue of his thoughts and feelings, Superman says no. And so that basically leaves him to just kind of be down there and try to find a way out for himself. But nobody else really knows what's going on. And that's when we kind of switch back over to Batman again, right? I want to kind of talk about this for a minute. Like, you switch back over to Batman and we end up finding out that Arkham Asylum has been torn down. The villains are no longer an issue anymore. And that while Alfred Pennyworth died after the Great War, with Perpetua and all that kind of stuff, that what ended up happening was Arkham was basically replaced with like this sort of Pennyworth home for individuals who were like looking for a reprieve, right? Like people who were looking to kind of get back to their senses or to find a place of respite, of relaxation. That's what this is for. And that Barbara Gordon plays a pretty big role in helping people get there. But it's kind of a crazy thing, because when all that happens, of course, we also end up finding out that in this future, Hawkgirl and Martian Manhunter ended up having a child together. And that's when Martian Manhunter uses his telepathy, pulls everybody in and says, this world is not what it seems to be. This world is not what you guys think it is. This is a dark place here. We don't know how dark this place is, but this is all an illusion. This place is a place of darkness, a place of suffering, and a place of pain. And that's when their child kind of pops up and says, I'm the one that showed them what this world, or at least told them what this world is really like. It's not a paradise. It's not a utopia. It is, in a lot of ways, an absolute living hell. And so what ends up going on is, of course, while this kind of message is being conveyed by the kid, suddenly this older version of Superman pops up and says, I will explain what it is that's going on. I will tell them what's happening. And of course, once he imprisons the Justice League mentally, then he simply goes through and starts to say, the person that I am is not Superman. I took on this form to comfort you. I took on this form so you wouldn't walk in here and immediately feel like you had to be on your guard. I wanted your guards down and I wanted you to relax, not so I could destroy you and kill you, but so that you could be at a place to where when I reveal who I am, you're not going to immediately try to attack me. Now, of course, this is the Justice League. They attack first and then ask questions later, but this guy reveals himself to be the World Forger. Now, again, I want to talk about this for a second, because this World Forger concept is relatively new. And the reason why is the idea of like I guess a forger of worlds really kind of came about with like Dark Knight's metal, right? Like all we really knew is that in the Dark Multiverse, you had some system by which worlds were being created. And when those worlds were created, they were being judged. If they were worth staying, they'd be allowed to go up into the multiverse and become part of the multiverse. If they were not, they would be kept down there and they would remain within the Dark Multiverse. Of course, that led to all different kinds of crazy and twisted alternate realities, like the Flash Batman hybrid, Red Death, and like, the Murder Machine, where Batman merges with like Cyborg or I guess becomes Cyborg and that kind of stuff. Just those twisted and really screwed up situations. villains. And so when the World Forger appears to them, he actually really kind of challenges them with a pretty significant thing. And it actually really switches Batman over to kind of to his side. What he does is he sits down and he says, in this multiverse that we live in, and because of what you guys have done, you've broken the source wall. And because you've broken the source wall, and because the Legion of Doom is trying to bring back Perpetua, it's only a matter of time before she arrives. And so what the World Forger has been doing is basically grabbing all these different members of the Justice League from across the entire multiverse and all these different villains, these superpowered beings, and has kind of offered them an option. Either join me and become a part of my cause, or stand against me and be imprisoned for all eternity, presumably like forever. And of course, the question is asked, do you ally with me or do you stand against me? And the Justice League, by, again, in the same way that Superman did, by their thoughts and feelings, stand against him. And so they're immediately teleported to a world, or I guess a version of Apocalypse that was created by the World Forger. Now, a lot of this stuff is being thrown into disarray. A lot of this stuff is kind of being thrown into flux. And the reason why is because when it comes to these concepts, for the most part, they've kind of been etched in stone. When you talk about like Apocalypse and like Darkseid, the New Gods, all that kind of stuff, by and large, it's the way it exists right now is there's only one Darkseid throughout the entirety of like the DC multiverse. And there's only one Highfather throughout the entirety of DC multiverse. There's only one Apocalypse and there's only one New Genesis. That's the way it works. Now, when we were talking about like post-crisis, after 1985, when there was only one universe and no multiverse, then the New Gods are basically out there in the universe and just kind of walled off from everything. But now, like there's only one of them in the entire multiverse. And so the implication seems to be here, the indication seems to be that either this is a different universe in and of itself entirely, or it's a whole other space that was created by the World Forger. And that really seems to be the case, that it's not really a different multiverse, it's just in the space that the various multiverses inhabit out in the distance somewhere, is kind of like this little small localized galaxy, right? Like a closet in your house. And so what this means is that like within this small little space, what the World Forger did is he built a version of Apocalypse 100 times the size of the one that we would normally see in the multiverse. And all those who stood against him are imprisoned there. And so it's kind of crazy because it's creating like, it's essentially a pocket reality out there in the space that like inhabits the multiverse. It's pretty far out there and it's really kind of mind-bending and a little wild, but it's still cool to see because of course, while Superman's trying to find his way out, while he's trying to like fight his way out of like this darker space, of course you have like the rest of the Justice League who are imprisoned by what's essentially an alternate reality version of Lois Lane, who ended up siding with the World Forger and saying like, I agree with his cause and I do this because I'm tired of seeing Jonathan Kent die in so many different universes. I'm doing this because at the end of the day, the lives that we save will outweigh the lives we lose. Now, the reality of this is actually 100% true. And that's why I say like the Justice League is actually kind of stupid, because what the World Forger is proposing to them is saying, look, if Perpetua comes back, she's going to wipe away everything in existence, like everything that exists right now, she's going to wipe it all away and she's going to recreate it in the way that she believes it should be done. And so if that's the case, a countless number of beings from across all things in existence are going to die. So what I ask of you is to ally with me and then travel the multiverse and even like beyond the multiverse and find other versions of yourself who will ally themselves with me. If they stand against me, we'll throw them in prison. And of course the Justice League said no, but that's stupid because what you're talking about is the preservation of untold numbers, and the Justice League's like, no, because we're talking about imprisoning people and that's not cool. You can't imprison people for things they haven't done, but it's not as simple as like the right thing versus the wrong thing. It's as significant as like the destruction of all things, right? Like of what use are moral principles if like all of reality gets wiped away? It's nice to take this sort of high horse, stance of, well, we always got to make sure we do the right thing, all that kind of stuff. But like sometimes you got to be the bad guy because in order to like preserve all existence, you got to do bad things. It's the way it works. There are no absolutes in right and wrong. There's all kinds of gray areas. And it's the only, Batman is the only one who realizes that and the only one who seems to figure that out because he's the only one that stays behind and sides with the World Forger and saying like, yeah, man, sometimes you just got to do bad things. Like that's just the way that it works. This kind of high horse, absolute, I always do good and I never do bad kind of moral philosophy that the Justice League walks around with, that can't work because at the end of the day, they can't do what needs to be done in order to make sure that like everybody gets saved. It's kind of a cool thing and it's kind of a cool moment because what it really does is it takes the Justice League as heroes and it looks them in the face and says, you guys are a half measure. You guys are all talk and like half brawn. At the end of the day, you guys put like goodness above what needs to be done. And it's kind of a cool thing, right? Because sometimes you got to sacrifice your moral compass in order to get the job done. And so it's a cool little moment here because where the Justice League is initially freed by like the son, this future son of Hawkgirl and Martian Manhunter, then of course they're basically rescued by like the Legion of Doom, right? Like Thal Sinestro and Cheetah and Gorilla Grodd. But then we also end up finding out that like they're also joined by Darkseid, presumably Darkseid in the future. And again, that's where things kind of get murky because if what we're doing is we're talking about a future story, then it makes a lot more sense if you say the events of this are confined strictly to the multiverse. But for the most part, Darkseid never really seemed to indicate himself as a character who would take up arms with the Legion of Doom or like any Earthbound superhero group or even supervillain group for the purpose of like achieving a goal, right? Like Darkseid's always been a villain who stands alone. If he can't do it on his own, that means that like it cannot be done. And so it's kind of a cool thing, because what this does is this really kind of Scott Snyder pointing to this future and pointing to the idea of Perpetua and saying, this is really how bad it gets. Like, it gets bad enough that like Darkseid ends up having to ally himself with various superheroes or like the Legion of Doom, because it's the only way to preserve all things in existence. And Darkseid is nothing if not a being that values his own preservation. And so it's kind of a cool moment, because what ends up happening here is that Batman's kind of given a test by the World Forger, right? Like a test of loyalty. And it's like, if you truly want to ally yourself with me, then the one thing you have to realize is Superman, he'll never back down. He'll never take the stance that you did. Superman will never take the stance of, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. He's never going to take that stance. Instead, like, he's always going to say, no, there's got to be a way to make that omelet without breaking some eggs. I don't know how it is. Maybe heat vision, he can just do that. But still, like, he'll never take that position. And so because of that, he'll never ever be able to join our ranks. That place that he's in, that pocket reality that the World Forger created that Superman is confined in, the bodies that are there, they'll always be filled with Superman. Because in every single universe that he's been to, and in every single multiverse that he's visited, Superman always stands against him. And that's when the question's kind of asked by Batman, if I pull this sun away, if I yank it away, will he die fast? And the World Forger says yes. And then Batman says, I'm sorry, Clark, but it's what we have to do. And basically pulls the sun away from Superman and effectively kills him. And it's kind of a cool little moment, because when that happens, Superman just sort of falls back down to this reality that he's been in. And by all standards of measurement, it appears he's going to die. Now, there are a couple things that go on with regards to the Justice League talking to the Legion of Doom, but it's an interesting moment because it's kind of a coming together, right? Like, the Legion of Doom says, hey, look, at the end of the day, like, we realize that like the World Forger is essentially wrong. We kind of brought this future about. Like, we brought this universe, or this perspective future about ourselves, because we were the ones who released her. Like, we were the ones who released Perpetua. We're the ones that basically caused all this. If it hadn't been for us, then like none of this would have happened. And so what this means is that the Legion of Doom is trying to make up for their past sins. I mean, Lex Luthor's out of the picture. We never really find out what he's become. We just know that whatever it is that he's become was like dark and twisted and really screwed up. And so it was like, okay, so like they've been trying to make amends this entire time for what they'd previously done in the past. And so of course, being chased by the forces of Lois Lane and being chased, kind of around this sixth dimension, ultimately like they managed to find a wormhole and they're jettisoned out, right? They're shot through this wormhole. And what that does is basically bring them back into like the main DC universe. And it's a great little send-off, and it's actually a great little moment. And the reason for this is because Lois Lane basically tells them, hey, look, Superman was kind of put in stasis when he was shot into this pod and then given like images designed to sort of acclimate him to like what Earth was supposed to be like, so that when he didn't show up here, he wasn't like immediately threatened by the first human he saw, having no idea what they were, and then just attacked them, right? Like, that's not what would happen. Instead, he would show up and he would be acclimated and relatively familiar with the environment of Earth, so that when he saw humans, he would realize, okay, they're not the worst thing ever. I mean, like, even as a baby, he wouldn't like panic and lose his mind or anything like that. And so what Lois says is like, we perfected that technology. And what we can do now is we can basically bombard people with these rays of sorts. We can put you into a state where you fall asleep and then condition you to basically agree with us. And so it's kind of cool, because when that happens, they literally start bombarding the ship with like the Legion of Doom and the Justice League with all these rays, threatening to put them to sleep. And that's why the Justice League is shot out and sent to this portal by the Legion of Doom, because it's the only way to get them back. It's the only way to get them out of this place. And so the Legion of Doom actually crashes their ship. And it's one of the most awesome things ever, because Thal Sinestro is like flying this ship into the forces of Lois Lane. And he's like, yes, that old feeling, isn't it? How could I ever forget the power of fear? And it's just like this amazing moment. I feel like it could have been like a little more grandiose, right? Like a little more drawn out, like the last ride of Thal Sinestro and the Legion of Doom. It would have been pretty awesome. And it could have been put together pretty well. But that's when we end up basically, emerging with this scenario where Batman dons this God armor and literally like just kind of wages this conflict against the Justice League. But that's one of the important things to bear in mind here, is that in this particular moment, Batman has essentially become God, right? Like, he has all the power, not really all the powers, but like the entire backing of the World Forger behind him, this vastly powerful entity. Now, again, the way the World Forger functions is he says, okay, look, I basically create worlds and send them out there. Like, that's my purpose. That's my job. That's the role that I play in this entire multiverse and, potentially multiple multiverses. And so with that being the case, he literally turns his weapons on the Justice League. Batman goes to fight them all. Like really, we should just call him Bat God. Like, Bat God goes to fight them all. And all the while, he's basically calling out to Superman. And that's when we end up finding out again, Batman was kind of planning this under the table the entire time. Now, under normal circumstances, I would make fun of this and just be like, of course Batman did, because prep time or something like that. But I'm not, because it's actually pretty awesome. Batman tricked a god. It's actually pretty cool. Like, it's pretty amazing the way this happens. Like, it's all happening under the current, because what he knew, the one thing Batman knew, and the one thing the World Forger did not know, is that Superman, this version of him, this prime version of Superman, is more powerful than all the others, right? It's what the World Forger told Batman. He said, look, Batman asked the question, can he break out? And the World Forger says, well, none of the other Superman have been able to, but this one's different. This is the prime Superman. What it seems to indicate is that like this was the first universe, and all the other universes that are out there that are part of the multiverse are templates, meaning it's the half-life effect, right? You can only ever be half as much as the thing that made you. And so that's basically what seems to be going on here, is like none of the other Supermen out there are on par with the prime Superman from the main DC universe. And so where none of them were able to break out, it doesn't mean he cannot. And that's what Batman was banking on. Batman was banking on this gambit, this idea that if he were to pull the sun away, that Superman wouldn't give up, that he would keep on trying to find a way. And that's exactly what happens. The energy put off by the Justice League, kind of combined with this sort of dream sequence that Superman has, basically leads him to realize that like the friends that he has will always be there. Like what he needed was this kind of courage to not give up. In this moment when he wanted to quit, in this moment when he wanted to stop, he didn't. And that all these little stars, all these things that had basically kind of been thrown out there by Batman were available for Superman to take advantage of. And he literally flies into a star and then comes out, but it seems like he's almost infinitely more powerful than he was before, right? Because all it says is like he's a million lanterns, he's a million flames lit by effort, by steady hands. Was it he moves faster than he ever has at a speed beyond physics. He's more powerful than he's ever been. Superman was already on par with most gods. I would say he's probably beyond them now, right? Like it's God Superman and God Batman in terms of the power he possesses. Now, how that compares to Superman 1 million, I don't know. Just take a guess, and whatever your guess is right. I have no clue. But in the moment right now, I would say that Superman and Batman possess the power of gods. And it's kind of a crazy thing to see, because what ends up happening, and the way this kind of gets laid out, is it's almost kind of like a retcon of sorts, right? I mean, what Scott Snyder says is that the way this World Forger works is like this. When we think about a singular universe, like you have all these events that transpire that take place, and then like Crisis on Infinite Earths happens. And the way we always imagined it is an event like Crisis on Infinite Earths wipes away everything that was there before, and then you kind of go forward with like a whole new creation. That's not what Scott Snyder's telling us. What Scott Snyder's telling us here is that reality gets wiped away, except for like the characters, and to a degree the fact that they're somewhat like shells, right? Like they're vessels for their new essences as they've been made by the World Forger to house, right? So like the World Forger designs a new version of Superman. He designs a new version of Batman, of Wonder Woman, of all these characters. He wipes away the essence of who they are and replaces it with that new essence. And so the only thing that really changes is the environment around them, the world that they live in, and to a degree, who they are as people in terms of how they view the world and how it impacts them. But again, like with the possibility existing that like this entire universe is going to be wiped away and it's all going to be totally obliterated, Superman seemingly comes flying out of nowhere. Now, how Superman got here, we don't really know. But given the kind of power he possesses now, I would surmise Superman flew through 2 dimensions to get here. He broke out of the 6th dimension, flew through the 5th dimension, through the 4th dimension, and then came into the 3rd dimension. So I would say he flew through 3 dimensions in order to get here. Superman busted through dimensional barriers in order to get here to where the rest of the Justice League is. And with a singular punch, lays out the World Forger. Now, he doesn't kill him. He just totally like flattens him and lays him out. And the World Forger is just kind of like, wow. Now, where he expects Superman to kill him, Superman says, no, we're not going to kill you. But with everything that's coming, with everything that's happening, everything with Perpetua, we're going to need you. Like, we're going to need a power like yours to basically save us, to keep us protected, or at the very least, to aid us in this massive battle that we're going to be facing. Without you, we stand no real chance here. And so that's when the Justice League is also faced with the fact that what the Legion of Doom had done is they had basically shown up to the rest of the world and said, hey, the Justice League broke the source wall. The Justice League set the multiverse on its path to destruction. The only way for you guys to save us, or for you to save yourselves, is to put your faith in us. Now, kind of a background story that was going on here was that Mr. Mxyzptlk had just kind of gone crazy and basically started like wiping away everything or trying to destroy everything. And the Justice League essentially called in Batmite. Now, that's an actual Legion of Doom story, I'm pretty sure. And so we're going to cover that as a separate video. That way we can kind of focus on it in its totality. But basically the takeaway from this is that the Legion of Doom, they're now on their way to basically bringing in Perpetua. Lex Luthor went to LexCorp, essentially sacrificed himself. You have Amanda Waller, who was subjugated by what was left of the Legion of Doom. They took all this information on where like the most powerful and dangerous villains throughout the entire world were being held. It's basically Year of the Villain #1. All the things that kind of go into it that either set the stage or came out of it. And so not only that, once it's all said and done and Lex Luthor begins to reemerge, what seems to go on here, and I could be wrong, but what seems to go on here is that Lex Luthor basically reverts back to like his Darkseid War version. Lex Luthor begins to turn into Darkseid again. I don't know if that's true. I'm not 100% sure that's true. It's kind of hard to tell, but that's what it looks like. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. But if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.